Hello and welcome to Careers on the Move from Cargomatic. I'm Tyler Kern. Now, if you were to randomly ask 50 people to define what supply chain is and what it looks like, you'd probably get 50 very different answers. And joining me today is an industry expert who's going to discuss his career path, his perspective on this vast and ever-changing industry, and the career opportunities that it presents. I'm thrilled to welcome Steve Rubin to Careers on the Move. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tyler. Great to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm thrilled to have you on the show today, Steve. So let's start off just with the basics. When you talk to people about what you do on a day-to-day basis, how do you describe it?
Sure. Well, currently right now I'm a board advisor for a few different logistics companies and a university here in New Jersey. And I provide basically strategic advice on growth, commercial growth opportunities, operational efficiency opportunities, both organic and inorganic growth, and I really provide all the support that these companies are looking for in an advisory role. Currently, right now in Cargomatic, I'm a strategic advisor, and I work with the executive team in providing them with various different pieces of advice on again, growth opportunities and operational efficiencies and things that are happening in the market. And it's an incredibly dynamic market right now.
It is an incredibly dynamic market, and it's an exciting time to be involved in this industry. But let's get you up to where you are right now. Kind of walk me through your career path and the different decisions that you made and the different positions that you've held kind of along the way.
Sure. So, I started off in the logistics field in the early 90s, late 91 to be exact, working for one of the big three Japanese shipping companies called K-Line, Kawasaki Kisen Kaisha, actually is the formal name. And I came aboard as a corporate manager for planning. And actually my background wasn't in logistics. And I really didn't know anything about container shipping at the time. I actually started out as an accountant. I graduated with an MBA with an accounting concentration and was working for one of the large accounting firms, the big 8 accounting firms, KPMG in New York City. And I was nobody's idea of a great accountant. And so I was actually really intrigued about looking to do something more active in the business world. And I had lived in Japan after college for a year, and I was really keen on engaging back with the Japanese company. And it just so happened through a connection, I was introduced to somebody who was running the intermodal logistics department of K-Line. And it looked interesting, even though I knew nothing about the industry, and I hopped on board. And it was really the greatest move. So I spent 18 years at K-Line, and I was really privileged to have a variety of roles in a variety of geographies. After a manager of planning, I became the head of intermodal contracts and intermodal track and trace operations. I spent a few years at our largest port in the Port of Long Beach, overseeing port operations and equipment operations. I was then promoted to the vice president of our National Operations Center when K-Line, they centralized their operations in the late 90s. And from there, I rose to oversee the entire North American operation. So it was a fantastic 18-year run. I got to see so much of the country and so much of what a shipping company does. And then from there, I was actually recruited to my first CEO role to be to run TRAC Intermodal, which at the time in 2008 was the country's largest chassis leasing company. And that was a really exciting opportunity for me because although I had done so much at K-Line, one thing I hadn't done was to oversee a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement. And so I was given the opportunity to actually run a company. It was owned by a very large private equity firm. They brought me on board. And I was tasked with growing the company. And within 6 months of having hopped on board, the Great Recession started. And so I learned like a whole new lesson in business around crisis management and dealing with companies that have to deal with recessionary environments. So I worked through that. It was a great 3 years. I left, and then within a year, I joined the board of Horizon Shipping Lines. It was actually a Sealand successor company, and it was the largest U.S. domestic container shipping company, also publicly traded. And I was recruited on that board because of my container shipping experience. But what was fascinating about that company, it was in the midst of very significant financial and operational challenges. And there was some really challenging issues that we had around decisions that the former leadership had made. And there was a lot to have to clean up. And I was actually tasked by the board to maximize shareholder and bondholder value. And the best thing to do that was to actually enter into an M&A transaction. And within a year after I became CEO, I was able to successfully sell the company to two competitors. I broke up the company. And boy, did I learn a tremendous amount around the acquisition world and the finance world and the refinance world, actually. And so that was pretty exciting. And as we were finishing up regulatory approval, I got a call from a really dear industry friend who asked me to talk to another private equity firm about coming aboard another logistics company. And that turned out to be ITS Technologies and Logistics, which is the largest intermodal terminal services and depot management company in the country. And it was right in my wheelhouse. Their largest customers were shipping lines. I know shipping lines. It was chassis leasing companies. I know chassis leasing companies. It was railroads. I know railroads very well. So that was a really exciting opportunity. And I took that over in 2015, right after the private equity firm, Carlyle Investments. They had tried to sell the company and they were unsuccessful. So I came on board following that unsuccessful attempted sale and rolled up sleeves. We entered into 3 M&A deals in 2 years. And by the end of that second year, we were able to put the company on the market and we were able to sell it to another private equity firm. And that was a really great outcome. And at that point, I had been on the road away from home for the better part of 4 years. And so I stayed on for a little bit. And then about almost 2 years after that sale closed, I departed and, took a few months breather. And here I am now in my board advisory role. And I actually have hung out my own shingle. I do a little bit of management consulting as well on the side.
Wow, so that's an incredible career trajectory that you've been on ever since making the switch over from accounting. What was it maybe initially about logistics that really grabbed a hold of you and has never really let go?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. And I always say, once logistics is in your blood, you're in for the long haul. And that's at about the 5-year mark or so. I could see once you're in it for about 5 years, you tend to stay in it for 30 years. I'm almost on my 30th year. And really what intrigued me and interested me about logistics was that there's so many interconnected parts. It's like a fine-tuned machine when it is fine-tuned that all needs to come together in order to run smoothly on the behalf of doing something, which I think is great, which is, the improving and helping the freight network move goods in a more efficient, better, pattern. And I've seen incredible changes over 30 years through improvements with technology, through massive investment in larger ship sizes, larger crane sizes, larger terminals, longer railroads. And it's been incredible to see and be part of such an incredible, true supply chain of many different companies that all have to work together in order to move freight from point A to point B. And I mean, when I started in the early 90s, China had just really opened up, to the world. I mean, they really only had one port, and that was in southern China. And to see the trajectory of how the global scale of goods moving, from Japan to China, from the US to China, from Europe to China, and to see the supply chain lengthen globally and be part of that evolution, of that growth, of world growth in supply chain, providing more goods to more people faster and cheaper than ever. It's been a really, really satisfying career.
So from your perspective, Steve, what skills or abilities or interests that you have, do you believe have contributed to your success in supply chain, be it math skills or just ability to think a certain way, things along those lines? What stands out to you as maybe being a contributing factor to your success?
Yeah, Tyler, another really good question. Really, because logistics has so many elements that there's a broad array of skills that I think have been really helpful to my career. Starting out as an accountant and having a bit of feel for numbers and profit and loss and how you go about figuring out operational cost per unit. How do you go about figuring out profit per unit? All of that, is really important in decision making at a managerial level. At the same time, you need to be curious. I've always questioned how things are done, and I've always been curious about, are there better ways of doing things, and never being satisfied with the status quo and driving continuous improvement. And it was something that has been with me, since my days at K-Line. There's a Japanese term called Kaizen, or continuous improvement, that is famous in the Japanese corporate culture, about just always figuring out how to do things better and more efficiently. And I was schooled in that at K-Line, and I've carried that through my career in the other companies, and it's really paid off. And so I think having a bit of an understanding and being comfortable with numbers, being curious and never being satisfied with the status quo, and trying to always continuously improve the efficiency of anything you do, which will always benefit your customer as well as your own company, really is a recipe for success.
Well, and in the same way you're talking about consistent and continuous improvement of oneself in this area, supply chain has also grown and changed and evolved over your years in the industry, right? So what kinds of substantial changes have you seen over your time in the industry, and what has maybe been some of the biggest advancements and the most exciting developments that you've seen?
Sure. The act of moving freight from point A to point B, on the face of it, really hasn't changed much since I've been in 30 years. Literally, the moving of finished goods, imports from China, being stuffed into a container, being put on a container ship, hoisted by a crane at a port, going across an ocean, having another port move, being put on a railroad, being put on a chassis, being delivered, by truck to a customer's warehouse. Those nuts and bolts haven't changed, but everything else around that, both physically and digitally, has changed dramatically. And so it's been a remarkable transformation. And the system has had to do that in order to account for the explosion of world trade and goods moved in containers, in the past 30 years. The only way the system has been able to function as well as it has, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the current challenges in the container supply chain, but by and large, the only way the supply chain has been able to function overall generally pretty well is through innovations in technology, particularly in data, in creating ways of taking pen and paper ways of doing bills of lading, in a computer, and literally faxing things, which was what we were doing in the early 90s. And now you could have transactions where from soup to nuts, two people don't even talk between a shipper and a carrier. And all of that has enabled to handle an incredible more amount of volume of freight to go through the system. And then, certainly the improvements in the engineering efficiency improvements through process engineering in terms of rail terminals, marine terminals, and even trucks and networks and the infrastructure that's been developed by port authorities has really all contributed to really what we have now, which is an incredibly robust and complex freight supply chain.
We mentioned challenges. What are some of the challenges that stand out to you today in today's environment with current trends? What are you seeing? What are some of the bigger challenges that need to be solved?
Sure. So, the challenge of the moment now is the incredible rush of freight coming from overseas, into the U.S. During the pandemic. That's been caused by a couple of factors. One being things were really shut down in the spring and early summer. Not much product was moving. The first CARES Act in terms of the coronavirus relief bill put an incredible amount of money in people's pockets, and the fact that people couldn't spend any money on travel and leisure meant that people were at home with some money and sitting in front of their computer all day and just buying and buying and buying. At least that was the experience in my house and a lot of my friends. The UPS driver comes several times a day to our neighborhood and to my neighbors. And, all of that has led to just a level of congestion that has occurred in the Southern California ports, the likes of which we have not seen outside of some, exogenous event like a major port strike or a weather event. But outside of that, it's amazing. I think literally as of today, December 28th, there are more than 25 container ship vessels at anchor in Southern California waiting to berth. That is more than any number that I can remember, in my 20-year career when I was with the shipping line. So, that's really, item number one is what do we have to do as an industry to come together to figure out how do we quickly reduce that congestion and move the goods through the supply chain, as efficiently as possible, given, the current situation. And there are no easy answers on that. It's one of the things that I am working with Cargomatic on trying to help figure out how Cargomatic can play in that equation and succeed. And we're doing some really unique things that I hadn't seen before and to really great success in terms of serving Cargomatic's customers. But really, we do need to continue to engage as an industry along the entire vertical of the supply chain between the customer, the shipping company, the marine terminal operator, the chassis provider, and the trucking company, and of course the warehouse and distribution center. All parts of those supply chain need to work closer than ever in order to help, smooth some of these some real challenging periods. We could say, well, pandemic, maybe once every 100 years, so we'll just get through this and we'll be okay. These one in every 100-year events, though, seem to be occurring a little more frequently. Back in 2015, we had a major port strike that had a severe disruption on the supply chain. We had some very severe weather events a couple of years ago that had an impact on the supply chain in Southern California. We had the tariffs that were implemented under the current administration that created a huge bubble of imported goods to beat the tariff impacts that also threw off the supply chain for several months. So in the last 5 years, I've just mentioned 3 or 4 significant events that have created a lot of challenges in moving goods efficiently and smoothly through the supply chain. And it's caused a lot of extra costs, throughout the chain, including down to the customer level. It's caused a lot of delays. And, each of these events might be a little bit different, but at the end of the day, we all need to focus on, working closer together as a vertical chain in order to ensure that the weakest link is identified and strengthened so that we can withstand these really challenging issues.
You know what strikes me is just that this feels like an industry for people who enjoy these challenges and enjoy big problem solving and enjoy being a part of something that is big on a global scale and being a part of something that is driving the world economy forward. What kind of people do you think would be and should be interested in roles in logistics and in supply chain? You know, people who are problem solvers, people who are leaders, people who are interested in those sorts of things. What stands out to you as people who maybe should be interested in a future career in supply chain?
Yeah, really, everything you just mentioned, Tyler, and those who are curious and those who just want to who want to make things better and who look at anything in any process. It could be in the kitchen, it could be in the garage, just and looking at a process and saying, how can this process be made more efficient? How can we do more in less time? How can we do more with less cost? How can we be more productive? You know, that sort of thinking, that sort of curiosity is really important and would really serve, you know, somebody well. And we'd love to have those types in the industry. A couple other really important traits. One is collaborative. I mean, supply chain by its sort of physical nature and even visually, you know, as you think about a supply chain, it's a handoff of goods from one party to another. And those parties need to collaborate really well in order to have an efficient supply chain. So, you know, somebody who is really good working well with others, somebody who is good at also thinking about having, you know, providing solutions where you might need to compromise. So, you know, having an ability to solve thornier problems in a group setting, you know, where you have competing interests, where you need to be creative, but also be somewhat compromising. You know, those types of character traits will really, really serve you well in this field.
So Steve, as we start to wrap up our conversation today, I want to get maybe a prediction from you just for what the next 5 to 10 years look like in the world of supply chain and logistics. What sorts of big trends do you see on the horizon that could become a bigger and bigger thing over the next 5 to 10 years? And what sorts of things are you looking for as an expert and as someone who's seen a lot in this industry?
Yeah, certainly this industry has not stood still. In fact, the pace of change has only, you know, accelerated as it has in other industries. And although it seems, as I mentioned before, that, you know, the visually the physical act of moving the goods looks the same, so much surrounding it has changed. And over the next several years, what I'm keeping my eye on are companies that you know, physically are involved in the supply chain, but also are providing, you know, digital visual solutions, you know, that provide, you know, through visibility across the supply chain. You know, you think about your phone and on your apps on your phone, and you could have 3 or 4 maps. You might have 3 or 4 you know, ride-hailing services. And the industry at this point is starting to go through something like that, where different companies in each area of the supply chain are starting to create their own applications and want members of the supply chain are trying to drive, for example, trucking companies into an application for a railroad A or a terminal B or a steamship line C. And I see a really great need for companies that can provide great technology across the supply chain, but also provide the underlying transportation, be it a railroad, be it a trucking company like Cargomatic, for example, that you can have both, where you can have customers drive their business, you know, to knowing that a company can provide those assets and execute on the actual movement of the goods, but also provide that interconnected across the supply chain visibility. That's really, really important, you know, as we continue to move in a space where, the velocity of the cargo is just going to continue to increase. The growth of international trade is going to continue to increase, and e-commerce is going to shrink the window down of how much slack there is in the system in order to deliver the goods. I mean, we're in a world now where, I ordered something this morning on Amazon, literally, and it's going to show up in 3 days. And in order for that to happen, the underlying supply chain from origin overseas to destination, close to inside the warehouse and onto the last mile truck has to be incredibly efficient and incredibly interconnected. And it's that evolution to a stronger and a higher growth e-commerce world that is really going to drive changes in these companies that are going to be successful in the supply chain environment we're in today.
Steve, final question. I'm going to put you on the spot. Supply chain and logistics has taken you all over the world. What's your favorite place that you visited or lived?
Wow, it's so funny. I was just showing my 20-year-old college daughter some photos back from a logistics survey I did in 2002 when I was going to China, and I visited the western regions of China, just as, before China had even entered the WTO. And when we think about how incredibly different China is now, and I look back on those days and photos and thought, what a phenomenal opportunity I had to, spend weeks and weeks, traveling around China. That was really special. I'm an East Coast guy, but I spent a couple of years in Southern California, outside the Port of Long Beach, and there are some absolutely stunningly beautiful areas there. And I have to say, Southern California still has my heart. But it's really one of the tremendous upsides to working in international logistics is the places you can go. And I should just mention one more. So when I was a CEO of Horizon Lines, my first order of business was to visit our offices that we had, and it just so happens my first 3 trips were to San Juan, Puerto Rico, Anchorage, Alaska, and Honolulu, Hawaii. So not too shabby places to visit. And so I felt very fortunate during my time at Horizon Lines, being able to visit such beautiful places. It's been an incredible privilege over my 30 years.
Those are some amazing places, and I'm jealous. I'm going to have to add some new places to my list. So, Steve Rubin, thank you so much for joining us here on Careers on the Move.
Thank you, Tyler. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely, I enjoyed it as well. And everyone, thank you for tuning into this episode. I hope you learned a lot from Steve and his experience. And of course, we'll be back soon with more from Careers on the Move. But until then, I've been your host today, Tyler Kern. Thanks for watching.